forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ievgen Zakharov. I'm the director of Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group, and I was appointed as a moderator of this panel discussion. I would also like to wish all the speakers to touch upon not only the issues and challenges of this idea, but also about some implementation solutions, measures and steps that could help encounter or resolve these problems. I would like to recall to all of you that this merge of these functions of operatives and investigators and establishment of the Institute of Detectives was envisaged, was stipulated by the coalition agreement, and even without special legislation it has been implemented within the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. There is this pilot project, and we have quite sufficient amount and scope of national experience to understand the risks and challenges, as well as the strengths and advantages of this idea. And I hope that this discussion will give us the opportunity to develop, to work out some general features of the model that is supposed to be optimal. Please, I would like to pass the floor to representative of the European Union Advisory Mission, Mr. Zbynek VANICEK.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Zbynek VANICEK. I am lead advisor on criminal investigations on European Union Advisory Mission in Ukraine. I am a retired Czech police officer. I spent all my professional life in criminal investigations. Until now it was 24 years, including different international missions. And I am here in Ukraine already for 2 years. And I found a lot of similarities to our Czech system 24 years ago, so when I joined National Police of Czech Republic. So it was pretty familiar environment for me, and I was really very happy to participate in this assistance to reform Ukrainian National Police. It's good. I found a lot of positives on Ukrainian police. They are very highly dedicated to their job. They are very enthusiastic and professional, and there is also a long and big tradition in Ukrainian police, which is good. We can build on it, but it is bad if we want to stuck to it. So we need to go for the reform, and during my stay here in Ukraine, since the beginning, I was trying to identify main problems in the Ukrainian police. So first of all, what I was surprised, it was a huge bureaucracy in cooperation, particularly between operatives and investigators. There are two different chains of commands here, which is also a complicating situation. There is disbalanced workload. Investigators are overloaded with these cases. But on the other side, there are very dependent operatives on investigations. They have no enough powers. They need to discuss everything with investigators. Then it complicates also these two chains of commands a little bit with mutual cooperation between them and coordination on working on joint investigations. Also, there is not existing intelligence-led policing model in Ukraine from European Union point of view, which also a little bit complicated situation we are already working on. So this all together shows that there are some problems which needs to be solved to increase efficiency of criminal investigations in Ukraine. So what is causing problems from my side are two chains of commands, two pillars in criminal investigations in Ukraine. When you have separate operatives, criminal police, and separate pre-trial investigation. This is very bad for cooperation, and this is causing main problem. In this way, the same point is that there are not effectively used capacities of criminal investigations. There are capacities, but they are not effectively used from my point of view. Also, problem is different competencies between investigators and operatives. Investigators have full competencies according to criminal procedural code, but operatives are very limited, and they need approvals and orders from investigators to fully participate in criminal investigations. This, of course, has consequences that there are problems with prevention, solving cases in a short period of time. It prolongs investigations. We would like to help national police to solve this problem. From our point of view, the basic solution is merger of two pillars, of criminal police and pre-trial investigation body into one chain of command, where there will be clear responsibility for criminal investigations. No any more arguments who is guilty, who didn't deliver what. Then, of course, merger of two positions, operatives and investigators, because it's really essential for them to make sure that they will have the same power in criminal investigations. How it will benefit, how national police will benefit from this merger. It will reduce bureaucracy, because these operatives with investigators will not have to anymore exchange letters for cooperation, coordination. They can work directly. It will balance workload, because operatives will share with investigators cases. There will be clear responsibility for results from criminal investigations, because there will not be any more possibility, no floor to blame each other. Who didn't deliver what? Who didn't fulfill which task, which orders, and who didn't give tasks. It will be also very good for mutual coordination of investigations and sharing experience. If we merge these two pillars together, it would also improve team spirit in criminal investigations generally. In this way, we see possibility how to increase current capacities of criminal investigations in Ukraine and to reach better results. And I am very happy to say that thanks to support from National Police of Ukraine, we launched together a pilot project in Borispol hub station, which shows immediately very successful project, because it has immediate results in form of increased number of solved cases, increased number of covered investigation search activities. Bureaucracy was decreased four times from previous period. I think it's very essential, because if investigators don't have to deal with papers, they can work more on investigations to concentrate on really important work. Workload, of course, was reduced because of sharing cases with former operatives. So workload is now better balanced, and also it increased team spirit. They talk more together about the job. They are coordinating better. So there are two proposals how to do this merger. First of them is so-called short-term or mid-term perspective, which we already started together with National Police in Borispol hub station. This merger is done in current legal framework without any changes, just using current capacities, current organizational structures, and it's done only through internal changes in National Police of Ukraine. How it works? Operatives who were fulfilling higher law degree, which is required for investigator position, were assigned as investigators, and in this way they received full powers to act according to criminal procedural code, including covered investigative search activities.
I'm sorry, please finish.
I'm close to finish. We are still. There are still small challenges because operatives who didn't fulfill higher law degree, they couldn't be assigned as investigators. So small number of operatives still stayed aside in operative unit, and they deal with operative search activities according to LOSA. According to LOSA, these newly established investigators cannot act currently because it's not allowed for them. Now I will be very short. From long-term perspective, we would propose to fix this situation and to make it perfect and to harmonize these changes with law changes. What we propose, it's just one proposal how to solve the situation very fast, are amendments to the law on national police, to Article 13, Part 3, where is mentioned structure of national police, and just easily merge criminal police and pre-trial investigation body into one body, criminal police and investigations. Very easy solution. Just it depends on political will. Then changes in criminal procedure code, Article 38, Part 1, where is defined pre-trial investigation body. Just replace term investigation unit with authorized units. Again, very small cosmetic change, but very radical for improvement of criminal investigations. Then Article 41, we would propose to replace term operative units with operative support units, which would be basically technical, which would provide basically technical support to criminal investigations. Then we are facing small challenges with LOSA in our merger project, Article 5, where is mentioned operative units, and again, with small changes, if it would be replaced, this term by authorized units in National Police of Ukraine, all problems would be solved. Anyway, according to LOSA, National Police of Ukraine don't act very often, so
I am very sorry, please finish. 11 minutes
enough.
Instead of 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. That's it.
Дякую. Я дуже прошу всіх спікерів.
I kindly draw the speaker's attention. You stick to your time limits so that we have time for discussion. I've prepared some notes for myself, so please, from time to time, look at me so that I would give you signals not to interrupt you. I would signal to you about the time. Please, the floor is now given to Mr. Oleksandr VAKULENKO, Deputy Head of the National Police and Head of the Main Investigation Department of the National Police. Please. Thank you. I would like first of all to thank the organizers for the opportunity to take part in this very honorable event. I think it's extremely relevant today as we are discussing the efficiency of providing investigative services, fulfilling investigative functions in the interests of the public, the citizens, and this is why we've gathered here to discuss this. And let's be frank that we have certain issues in this area that date back to 2012 when the new version of the Criminal Procedural Code was adopted, the problems that arose in the course of the reform of the militia, former militia, and transformation into the national police, and other challenges entailed by social, economic conditions in the country, as well as certain disbalance in the law enforcement system in general. To objectively perceive what is going on and what should be made, what is being made, we first of all need to touch upon, to articulate one global problem. And I think this problem is that if we start telling the truth to each other, we would probably be able to resolve up to 80 or 90% of problems. These are the current conditions, and I think that probably there will be some critical elements or criticism, and I repeated many times at the meetings in the National Police when we discussed our performance about the exposure of crimes and detection of crimes and criminal offenses in particular. Obviously in 2012 there were some drastic changes in their organization and in the approaches to investigation. Today we have certain practices in application of the amended legislation, and today we are able to discuss certain issues and to develop certain solutions, what has been made and what else needs to be made. And one of such important aspects is the efficiency of investigations. I remember I was a witness and a participant of the development of the new criminal procedural code, and until a certain moment the understanding of the current operatives was non-existing, and probably the lawmakers wanted to, or were thinking about making some unified police officer who would be responsible for detection and for exposure of crimes. And some 4 or 5 months before the adoption, we started a process that was initiated by leadership of some operative units, where a decision was made to not to eliminate these units, these departments. And so it's now fifth year. For fifth year, we're working with this, and we've come to the situation when we discuss various categories of police officers responsible for detection and exposure of crimes. The use of such term as detective has probably complicated our process to a certain extent. It's a relative name, relative notion, detective. When we discuss this process, we are supposed to create a responsible, accountable police officer who should be fully accountable according to the code for exposure of crimes. We already mentioned many times our Borispil pilot project. It is ongoing, and we can say that it has certain positive elements, but I think it's too early to judge and to assess this project in full scope. We have a bigger number of solved crimes where indictment was taken to court. We have certain reduction in bureaucracy, but believe me, it's not that significant to say that's an important step. This formal answers and formal procedures were not a big or major global problem. Yet what we need to come to is to ensure responsibility for exposure of crimes. I think that in our current practice the operatives were not fully responsible for the results, and unfortunately today we have such bad statistics when from the entire number of criminal proceedings in the country, 78 or 80% of crimes are obvious crimes where a abuser or perpetrator was known at the time of a crime, and only 20% of crimes account for cases where they were exposed or solved only due to the efforts of the operatives. This is why this merge of functions and responsibilities, placing responsibilities on operatives to be responsible before the law for the results of the investigation, it would be, I assume, would be quite positive. The risk of this is that the situation that those who used to be operatives, who had the opportunity to have wider competences and functions, they need to be aware and conscious that they are accountable and responsible, and the wish, their desire to focus on some covered searching activities, they need to realize that they are responsible for the effectiveness of these activities and for the efficiency, and this is the main goal of our process. Speaking about the legal aspects of these merger functions, I think today's way is the most objective, unimpaired one. We reappointed people without making amendments to the current criminal procedural code, and today the current code gives us the opportunity to do this in the shortest possible time, and in the midterm I think it's quite a feasible mechanism. A very positive element in this process is the fact that, as was mentioned by the head of the national police, that we have three groups, three categories of police officers dealing with different classes of crimes, like grave crimes, average gravity crimes, and third category like minor crimes, where the decision in the course of investigation is made about the closure. I apologize, but the time limit is about to expire, and when we set up this third group, we managed to release the investigators from high workloads. We made an attempt to distribute the responsibilities in a quality way, creating certain prototype for future inquiry practice, and I'm convinced that with the current needs of the law enforcement, I hope that the law on misdemeanors will be adopted soon, and we will be ready for the practical implementation and application of this law. I think that the process is much needed one. There will be many challenges and probably criticism, but we have to proceed, and I would like to wish all of us success, and we hope for support from our colleagues from prosecution and support from the public. Thank you. Thank you, and I would like to pass the floor to Mr. KAREIEV, who will tell us about the experience of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Dear colleagues, dear participants, really with the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau as a law enforcement agency, with the main task to detect, to identify, to expose, to prevent criminal offenses, corruption offenses by top officials, we created a new institute in the country, in the law enforcement sector, such a new institute as detectives. Detectives, in terms of their functionality, they combine both the competences of operatives and investigators. It's now a year and a half have passed since the time that this new institute has been introduced and put to practice. So based on this, and based on my previous experience of more than 15 years of work as investigator and operative, I can outline or highlight both some positive and negative features of this new Institute of Detectives, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there are much more positive things or strengths than negative ones, and this is confirmed by our performance results of our newly established agency authority. We started from scratch. We started from building up an institute of our team of detectives. First, in the history, people came to this newly established agency, people who did not work in any law enforcement agencies previously, and over 1 year, or slightly more than 1 year, they learned their operational practices, and they can be considered as efficient law enforcement officers responsible to perform their tasks. I would like to highlight some positive elements of this institute. I would go by bullet points. Firstly, it's the possibility to organize the work on site using some information technologies, to use some information resources in the course of investigation. Secondly, its focus on fulfillment of their tasks put on detectives of NABU. From the very beginning, we could see, and we have been picking the information that we think is interesting or promising in terms of pre-trial investigation and for court consideration of proceedings. Another positive thing is that detectives can act on their own or independent on making decisions about proceedings, about the files of searching and investigation. So detectives are making operative searching activities and can make decisions on their own whether it's sufficient number of files that they gathered about certain elements of a criminal offense. Operative support of pre-trial investigation by detectives. Operative independence of detectives. Cases of filtering of certain information are excluded, so when operatives do some searching investigative activities, they receive a big amount of information, and these teams, operative and investigative teams, detectives also receive this information, and they are able to assess this information and use it in their operative activities and in investigative practices. Speaking about some negative features, I would think that concentration of intelligence, investigative capacities and technical capacities in one person is of a negative nature. Today, detectives not only do some operative and search activities, investigative work, but they are also involved in some operative technical steps, activities, which means that there's a high workload on one officer, on one person, and that requires great effort both in terms of training and workload. When I joined National Anti-Corruption Bureau, we had 25 criminal proceedings in my department. Today we have 130. We have 3 subdivisions fully functional, and we have 330 criminal proceedings in total for all the 3. So this increase has a negative effect and sometimes makes it impossible to be proactive and assertive in the investigation process. And there are many criminal proceedings registered at the decision of our investigating judge, and in some cases they don't have any prospects for pretrial investigations and for court consideration, but we spend or waste resources on them. Information is verified, and then these criminal proceedings are closed. So these are some of the negative experiences. Speaking about the merger of functions of operatives and investigators, I think that this is a positive or promising area that should be considered to be implemented in the practices of the national police. There was a period when combating organized crime was organized on the basis of operative departments, and it used to be investigative department in 2009, if I'm correct. And I was working in that body at that time as a deputy head of the investigation department. And I think it was a correct decision, and there were some positive changes when operatives and investigators have common goal, have common aim, and they are coordinated and they are managed by one leader, and they receive the tasks to be performed, to be fulfilled in a centralized way. So that excludes certain elements of bureaucracy, duplication or excessive number of meetings, operational tasks, when there's a single manager who puts the tasks, when operatives and investigators work as one team, and that produces a positive result. I don't know why they rejected this form, this approach. It existed only for 1 year. Generally speaking, there are many positive takeaways from the merger of operatives investigators, and it's not that meaningful how you would call these departments detectives or any other way. It's rather about the organization of their work, and they should be under one chain of command. Thank you. Thank you. And the floor is given to Mr. CHIBISOV, Prosecutor of Kyiv region.
Hello, dear participants. Thank you for inviting me here. I would like to thank EUAM for active support of all our initiatives, reforms that we're doing now and will continue to do. I would like to personally thank Zbynek and everyone else who was at the very beginning of this reform, which we are already implementing. This pilot project started when in September last year representatives of the mission approached me and asked me what I thought about this kind of reform, merging some units of police and creating this Institute of Detectives. Well, I analyzed the situation, and we came to a conclusion that legislative changes are needed because the investigators are overloaded. We developed certain drafts, and then we analyzed the situation. We realized that the country is moving ahead and we need to implement these reforms rapidly and efficiently. They have to be conceptually new because we want conceptual changes. Because what we've had for 75 years, we cannot possibly improve it and take into account all our positive experience and take into account the positive experience of 28 EU member states. We have reached a conclusion that we can reach actually the same results without making legislative changes. I have analyzed the work that has been done, and I would like to note that thanks to Mr. Lutsenko, who actually assigned me to do this analysis and to keep in close contact with EUAM. But as you can see, we have a lot of representatives from the General Prosecutor's Office, and they would be happy to say hello to us. We are cooperating very closely. Every week we would meet and discuss our further steps. We also cooperated with the National Police. We also see participants of the National Police who worked with us, how to make it viable, feasible, implementable, so that this concept would allow to merge operatives and investigators' functions. What would be the benefits? The first benefit is more security for citizens, because the greatest problem we now face is that we have a lot of pending criminal proceedings, and this backlog of criminal cases was growing last year. And only this year we were able to curb this tendency and even see some reduction. However, all these criminal cases are still pending in the system. Who is going to solve them and close them? We had some contradictions in the system, because somehow operatives and investigators should share the responsibility, but they would always end up in some kind of conflict, because an investigator would not be able to lead this case to an end, because he would have to give certain tasks to operatives, but then operatives would not be able to do this task, and it would take weeks, months, and years. Oftentimes they would have different opinions on which steps have to be taken. So an investigator has one opinion, thinks that this is needed, whereas the operative who is doing work for him does not agree and thinks that this is useless. And in the end, the case is not solved. And what does it result in? People who are criminals are not brought to responsibility, and then the number of proceedings in the register is growing. So what did we do? We were able to change this conceptually, because now we have personal responsibility. Because we have one specific person who is responsible for a specific case, and this person has both investigative and operative powers, so he is able to go to the field and do investigative actions. Before it was not possible. If you look at the CPC, it says about covert activities which this person is allowed to do. So we have changed the approach to investigations. We increased personal responsibility for solving cases. Yes, and sometimes the workload is growing, it looks like, because you also have to do operative activities. But what do we do to solve this problem? We make sure that they work in pairs. So there is an investigator and an operative who work together and share experience and ensure the best possible result. And the prosecutor's office is ready to cooperate and is interested in cases being solved. Then they would support this kind of approach. And at the end of the day, this would result in reduced workload on the investigators. In the future, we have to take into account that we also need to create the Institute of Criminal Misdemeanor, because over 70% of criminal cases are either obvious or minor crimes. They will be filtered, and another institute will cover them. So investigators who know how to work will be dealing with serious cases, and now we have problems in investigation of serious cases. I will cite some statistics, but not too many, not to overburden you. The number of cases sent to court has increased by 15%, but it's only compared to last year. But only in the third month the system began to work, because in the second month we had a dip. General change is that over 40% of criminal proceedings have become more effective. Crime clearance rates have increased, because people no longer work separately, but they work jointly for the benefit of people and to ensure their safety in order to bring the guilty people to responsibility. We also see more efficient cooperation between prosecutors and investigators. And this is because you do not need to involve any other people to this cooperation when a case is being investigated, because people know each other and they join efforts in order to ensure the best possible results and bring the suspect to responsibility. If you consider Borispol district, we have a very minimum number of crimes. So we don't have any high-profile cases in Borispol district since we started implementing this project. And this is also an achievement. I'm going to close. I would like to thank EUAM, Zbynek, representatives of the National Police, head of the National Police, who also cares about this reform, who is trying to roll out this reform in other regions. We hope to see it in Kyiv region too. We have a lot of ideas which we would like to implement by joining efforts, and then we will have a safe future for our citizens. They will feel safe and secure. They will be able to walk in the streets day or night. They will not worry about their children, and they will sleep peacefully at night. They know they are safe and secure. This is our goal. Thank you, everyone, for your kind attention. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Dmytro, MONASTYRSKII, member of the SPI Selection Commission, expert at the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. Hello. I would like to speak for 30 seconds about the State Bureau of Investigations, because we mentioned this subject. It's hard not to see this procrastination with the formation of the Bureau. Now the Commission is making checks. We are waiting for the Cabinet of Ministers to conduct a check, but this was not signed by the Prime Minister yet. So we have these technical problems which procrastinates the process. The CPC says then within 5 years after the CPC takes effect that it should start working. I think it's unrealistic. Now, as for merging the functions of operatives and investigators, I think it's a very bold reform in law enforcement agencies, because there is still a battle of concepts going on, because in Parliament they say it's not appropriate or expedient to do this, and at the moment it's not possible to change the CPC for the sake of this reform. Is not possible, and it's hard to find any arguments to convince you of the opposite. Second, this reform is being done too fast. It is not possible to reform anything in an emergency now that the investigators are so overloaded. We are in extreme conditions, and it was a very courageous step to actually start doing this reform. Number 3. People who support the old system, who support that we should have both operatives and investigators, say that this reform might kill operative activities. But I would like to ask you, what is it like now? Is it efficient enough? And the answer is negative. That is, operative activities are virtually non-existent in the country. I have invited one representative from Boryspil. He is an ex-operative. I would like to give him the floor so that he would tell about his experience. Now, about some risks of this reform. If you look at Kyiv Oblast, we saw a high motivation among the prosecutor's office, among national police, to make sure that this reform is successful. But if in other regions the senior management is not motivated or interested, we can see quite different results. So if you artificially increase the number of investigators in the units, it does not mean necessarily that the real investigators, there will be more of them, because there are some ghost employees who are not fulfilling their functions as investigators. If you consider this reform, there was no good communication between the general public and the lower link of the system. One more aspect I would like to note, so that I would then give the floor to the ex-operative I talked about. I think that the standard term training of investigators, it's usually 3, 4, 5 years. So the real results of this experiment we will see only in a few years. And at this stage today we have to raise the issue that operatives who have become investigators, they need more knowledge, more training. And only investigators cannot provide this kind of training, because you have to use high educational institutions to provide this kind of training. But as of today, they have not had a chance to develop a curriculum for such ex-operatives who have been appointed investigators. So we need to address this gap too. So now I would like to give the floor to an ex-operative who is responsible for serious and very serious crime, who will talk about his personal experience, how he was an operative and now has become an investigator. You have 2 minutes. Hello, my name is Podhorny Serhiy. I am now deputy head of the first unit responsible for serious and very serious crime in Boryspil. Previously, I was acting head of investigation, and I used to be an operative. What kind of problems did we operatives have? So we would have to find information which we would have to share with the investigators. We would present a report to the investigator, and then we would wait for the investigator to act upon this report. In early 2017, when we were told that you're going to be investigators, everyone started asking themselves, oh, are we going to get a lot of criminal cases? And then we will start thinking, what are we supposed to do with this? But it wasn't that bad in the end, because when we became investigators and started to open criminal proceedings, we were working together with investigators and prosecutors who are always ready to help. We realized we do not need to lose time and use this time to solve cases, actually, and this was a good achievement. So we're able to file motions ourselves, go to prosecutors ourselves, and for me personally, I'm gaining experience which allows me to come to an appellate court, for example, and hear the judge's opinion, and then I take it into account and try to change something in what I do. So we don't lose time. We have more time for investigation. Right now I have about 60 cases. When I analyze these old cases, you see just task report. So it was like ping pong between the investigator and the operative. But formally, it's a lot of bureaucracy, but no tangible results, and the cases are still pending. So now when we operatives, ex-operatives and investigators start working together, it's a real pleasure, because when the victim and the defense lawyer come, they say, have you started working better? We say, no, we're just undergoing reform. When we call victims about old cases and ask them to come, people are really grateful that we remember about their cases. So I think it is wonderful to be a detective of the National Police. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dennis, for your initiative. And now I would like to give the floor to Vladyslav VLASIUK, who is a representative of Lead Office.
Good afternoon. I have not brought anyone with me, so I will be speaking myself. This is my 7 minutes. In fact, I'm very pleased to be here. It's very good that we have this broad forum involving various people representing various agencies, institutions, experts, and we have this expert discussion, and we draw attention to this important, relevant topic as criminal investigations and possibly simplified investigation called inquiry. I think that this reform might be meaningful and important for public at large, for various institutions, and these simple, so-called simple crimes, these are the current day-to-day practices that people encounter, and this is what establishes our perception of such notion as security and safety, and this is what changes the attitude to the national police and its performance. I remember that when I first met Eka Zguladze in 2015, I had a big positive impression, and apart from patrol police, she also was talking about some other things, and she was talking about Institute of Detectives. It's a pity that it's being delayed in time, but ultimately we keep going with this project, and these people who autonomously, independently deal with investigations of certain criminal offenses. It's very positive. I cannot offer you some more details to this audience than the previous speakers, but given the fact that I have certain police background and I am a lawyer specializing in certain cases, I'm also honored to represent the public to a certain extent and expert community. I will attempt to touch upon certain risks, or probably will give some comments from the point of view of advocates, or lawyers, public and expert community. Firstly, we need to understand that the interest of every citizen is about investigation of a particular case which affects a certain person. Obviously, we can discuss the number of cases, the clearance rates, the results, and whether they are included in the register or not. But it's the interest of one particular person that his or her criminal proceeding is being investigated. And it's of crucial importance that every case needs to be investigated and included into the unified register of pretrial investigations. At the same time, there is such a problem for some citizens and for some lawyers when, due to certain reasons, criminal proceedings are not initiated or are closed immediately or rejected. Reports or appeals of citizens are not considered, just rejected. So these challenges remain and they pose a problem for the public. So, in addition to some general rules of safety and security, we need to realize that people are egoistic, and every person wants that his or her proceeding is investigated, and I think that in that sense the Institute of Detectives helps seriously. According to the information of the pilot experiments, detectives managed to investigate more cases, do it more efficiently, and that may ensure that citizens' criminal proceedings, cases are addressed. On the other hand, we know that defense lawyers protect witnesses and potential suspects. They're also interested to destroy or to undermine any proceedings, any case. And I think in that respect it would be correct to gather more information about the results of the pilot project and to go up to a higher level of legislative changes, of changing the legal framework, and once the experiment, the pilot confirms its efficiency and becomes all-inclusive, fully-fledged, then it would be correct to fix that in legal terms that could help create certain safeguards in terms of securing human rights and establishing institutional memory, as the leadership of National Police and the leadership of Ministry of Interior might be changed, but the institutional memory will remain. And I think that the majority of the experts confirm that sooner or later the results of this pilot project need to be fixed legislatively, and I think that everybody will agree that if we take specifically this pilot on detectives, it's interconnected with the law on criminal misdemeanors. The concept on the law of misdemeanors, there are different concepts, and some of them were rejected by the Verkhovna Rada. There's also another draft law being developed, so this topic is targeted at one and the same aim, to reduce the workload and to raise the efficiency for exposure of crimes, for solving crimes. And to that end, obviously we need certain specializations or division into categories, like misdemeanors, criminal misdemeanors or minor crimes and so on. Another aspect that I would like to raise is, which might be interesting for us, is that when we introduced the patrol police, it's more or less sustainable and autonomous in decision making. I think that this independence in decision making, it enables police officers to feel some kind of internal dignity, and unavoidably that leads to professional independence, to growth in professionalism, to accountability not only for exposure of crimes but professional growth. And I think that this feeling of personal dignity is a prerequisite for better performance for police officers, and also certain safeguard and guarantee to avoid those sad events that we had during the Maidan time. And I think that this independent performance, independent and autonomous work would be a safeguard from bad experiences. And in the end, I would like also to recall that it would probably be correct at the same time when introducing the Institute of Detectives, it would be correct to somehow gradually change and develop the assessment criteria to assess the performance of investigators and future detectives, not just be based on statistics, but also change and introduce so-called key performance indicators. So to sum it up, I think that the experiment, the pilot project is quite correct, and I think that broadly it would be supported by lawyers and other stakeholders, but we need to focus on certain aspects of this reform. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, and I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Joachim VENZ, who is the advisor of OSCE.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can show my presentation. Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to have the opportunity to present to you my personal experience in enhancing cooperation of criminal justice institutions. And I would like to thank the colleagues from the European Union Advisory Mission for Civil and Security Reform and OSCE Project Coordinator in Ukraine for inviting me to this event. As a member of the OSCE Transnational Threat Department in Vienna, with 43 years experience in operational and administrative aspects of police services in Germany, I have learned the lesson that reforms in the law enforcement sector must be complemented and synchronized with reforms efforts in the other sectors of the criminal justice systems in order to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of the entire criminal justice process and to increase access to security and justice for the population. But to translate legal definitions or legislative reforms in action and apply it in practice, policies needs to be adopted that define how the law should be applied. The policies and the measures required to implement them need to be expressed in clear organizational structures, procedural guidelines, and regulations on competences. Also, a lack of communication between the police, prosecution, and judges, including insufficient mechanism for storing and sharing information and tracking cases of criminal offenses, significantly hampers coordination in criminal proceedings. This may lead to delays in criminal proceedings as well as to the creation of incomplete investigations files that may lead to the dropping of cases before charges are pressed. Furthermore, dysfunctional reporting and case management systems and unnecessarily prolonged pretrial detention times violate human rights of both detainees and victims with regard to access to case-related information and due criminal process. And as a consequence, it damaged the credibility of the entire criminal justice system. For today's session, I'm going to share with you my own experience in police reforms which have happened in Germany during the last 25 years. German police, as a part of public administration, had to adopt their responsibilities for internal security by participation in social processes. During my active role as an investigator and later on as a member of the senior management in Hessian police, law of police and criminal procedure code had developed significantly. Therefore, organizational structures and duties of judiciary, police, and local authorities had to be adjusted, and acquired knowledge could be used to reconfigure the institution. Some measures have been accompanied by staff reduction, currently discussed critically under the threat of terrorist attacks. As an advisor on crime, I don't want to make any kind of comparison with the Ukrainian criminal justice system, because we are not responsible for that. But I hope that I can give you a deeper, or let's say, an overview in useful processes, which must be continually, constantly for the benefit of the citizens. Finally, you have to know that the German criminal procedure code allows prosecutors to transfer their powers to the police to conduct certain evidentiary actions during the pre-investigation procedures, which can be used in the further course of proceedings, providing that evidence is gathered in a legal way. What I'd like to show you is now how it works in our short state or land in Hesse. You know that after the Second World War, Germany was divided in different kind of states and lands. So we have more than 6 million inhabitants living in Hesse. The number of police officers are there 16,000 approximately, and the number of citizens per police officers are 356 approximately. At the end, they have to tackle with 412,000 criminal offenses, and we are proud to have a crime clearance rate about 62%. This is the background, and I'd like to show you something about this small island in Hesse. It's the police headquarters in Frankfurt, where I was responsible for criminal investigation. So more than 100,000 crimes, 61% clear up, 2,600 police officers, about 900 of them are criminal investigators. So a third part per more or less are criminal investigators dealing with all these crimes and these offenses. So don't be confused, this is the whole structure from the police headquarters of Frankfurt. There is no need to explain everything to you, but I like to show you something about these 4 departments. These are regional police departments with some police stations. And you will see that in all these regional, we have these criminal investigation departments working there, plus one centralized criminal investigation department dealing with special kind of crime. So most of the police officers are working in the criminal investigation department, but some of them are dislocated on the field, more or less, working together with the colleagues in regional level. So you see, these are the different kind of organizations. On the left side, you see decentralized processing. These are the colleagues in the field. They are working with misdemeanor, minor offenses, mass crime, theft, assaults, property damage, e.g. There is no specific investigation expertise is required. But on the other side, you have the centralized processing, where we're working with gang crime, economic crime, organized crime, cyber-enabled organized crime, state security offenses, and terrorism. There you need specific knowledge and investigation expertise, because it's mandatory there. Last not least, there is nothing without but. We have some requirements on that, and keeping consideration that the prosecution office is in lead for our kind of investigation, able to, let's say, to send also some, let's say, responsibilities to the criminal investigation department. First of all, there are some operational demands. There should be an organizational structure, should be clear for everybody, for prosecutors and police officers too. Perhaps it could be the same kind of organization, of course, who is responsible for what. You have to have clear rules on jurisdiction. Police officers has to know who has to deal with what. And at the end, there should be a coordinated process flow. It means all, let's say, the files has to reach the address later on. You have to have some technical demands. It's easy to write down that you have to have common communication network. This is easy to say. You have to have IT, and perhaps, prosecutor's office has also the responsibility or the chance to use this IT system. So perhaps there should be a common system on that. We are working on that, sorry. You have to have legal demands, but it's already discussed by you. You have to have correlated legislative. The police law and the criminal procedure code has to have similar kind of responsibilities. And last not least, and it's also touched by our colleagues, you have to have educational demands. You have to have specific vocational training. In Germany, you have to know that we have a bachelor degree and master degrees, let's say, mandatory for our police officers. And perhaps, that should be discussed later on with the prosecution office, perhaps for a special kind of crime, like economic crime or organized crime or cyber-enabled crime, you have to have common trainings with the prosecution office too. This is my opinion on that. Thank you for inviting me.
Many thanks.
Unfortunately, the speakers have left us very little time for discussion. Do you have any questions, please? Hello, I'm from the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. Very useful information. Thank you. Because before I came here, I had a different opinion about the necessity of giving some powers to operatives. But now my opinion has changed a little. I am involved in pretrial investigations, and I would like to ask the following question. The only person who talked about merging, Mr. VANICEK, he talked about the merge of operatives, investigators, and courts. This is very important, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that interrogation of witnesses is now a problem. If you want to unload investigators and speed up the imminence of punishment and improve the timeline for solving cases, you have to do this as fast as possible. But one of the problems is that the investigator interrogates a witness. This is documented, and according to the current CPC, the court will admit only written evidence at the court hearing, because this evidence has to be checked, verified. So I would like to ask, would it be possible or necessary to introduce the institute of witness interrogation in court? Because now Article 225 sets the conditions when we can interrogate these people. But perhaps we should find a joint solution so that the court would be able to do this together with the investigator, so that they would not have to do it again later. So what do you think about this idea that we also need to involve courts in this process and reform the CPC in order to make powers to take part in interrogations for courts? Yes, indeed, we have a great problem when a crime is committed, when it is being solved. The investigator, procedural manager, this process has objective and subjective challenges. I quite support your concept that we need to reform and simplify how we spend our capacities. But as of today, I think it is impossible. It it is not feasible in our present conditions. It is not possible to reform the judicial system in this way, because we have representatives of the police here and heads of investigative units. We know that very few investigating judges are available, so courts are heavily understaffed. There is only one investigating judge, and if he takes part in this investigation as investigative judge, he will not be able to make the judicial decision afterwards. And another practical aspect, when a witness is identified and interrogated by a police officer, then this information is given to the investigator. The investigator does the same. Then he goes to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor says, I would like to see the witness myself, and I will interrogate him too. And then the head of the prosecution can again want to interrogate this poor witness himself. So when the witness is called 4 or 5 times, this witness says, I'm sick and tired of these interrogations. I don't think I see any changes. If I go to court, I guarantee that I have not seen anything. So this is a very difficult question. We would love to simplify and to find more efficient mechanisms. And I hope we someday reach this goal.
Yes. As an external, I'd like to give you a short insight in what happened in Germany. Because most of the interrogations, most of the interviews are done by the police and not by the prosecutors. In special circumstances, the prosecutors are invited, or by their own wish, if it's necessary for the suspect or whatever. If a witness comes to the police and makes some statement, if it's a special kind of crime, perhaps also domestic violence, we have to take care about the witness. So the interrogation or the interview will be done only once, together with the prosecutor, or done by videography. And that is enough later on to present it in front of the court. But it has taken last 10 years to change the system in our procedure code and also in front of the law. But at the end, now we have the chance to do it only once time with videography and present it to the court later on.
We are running out of time. I would like to give a short comment. This question is very relevant. Perhaps not everyone understands, but yes, a practical example. A couple of weeks ago, we had a case where there was a theft. The person acknowledged his guilt, gave testimony. We had evidence, material evidence, but then the court issued an acquittal. As it turned out, the suspect changed the testimony, but at the same time, there were some violations about 5 years ago, and then the court did not admit this as evidence. So because of these violations, the court acquitted this person. So that to prevent the situation, the court has the right to interrogate the suspect itself. But there are certain conditions which limit the powers of courts in this area. So there are certain circumstances, for example, when a person is going abroad. But sometimes the investigation does not have these circumstances. For example, one person killed another person, caused bodily harm. These circumstances are important as evidence. What then we do then? We need to document this evidence. So I propose to make amendments to the legislation so that an investigator, upon agreement of his procedural head, would be able to interrogate this person, and this could be used as evidence in court. And then these people will be interrogated, and there will be no problems during the court hearing, and all the guilty persons will be brought to responsibility.
Until we adopt respective legislative provisions, there's no sense in discussing this topic of detectives. My estimates, I speak as an academician of the National Academy of Sciences, changes in addition to the law of detectives, when it changes to the criminal procedural code, it changes to the law of the National Police of Ukraine, amendments to the law on the prosecution, amendments to the law on the operative searching activity, and cannot simplify things. There should be deep operative searching activities, work of agents on covert activities. All this needs to be taken into account. We need to adopt a more social protection of detectives, on pension provision for detectives, as this procedural position of detective, even if it has another title, not necessarily detective or some kind of inspector officer. We need to think about legislative framework, legislative support for this institute of detectives. I saw Professor VLASIUK here in the audience, rector of the academy. We need to work for lawyers. If there's no law, detectives and lawyers will be breaking our cases undermine if it's not procedurally regulated or legally regulated. Let me just make a small comment. I generally support your point, and I clearly understand that if we introduce a new procedural entity, we need to introduce a series of legislative amendments. This is why today we're acting with the applicable legislative framework. Former operatives have been appointed as investigators, and they are using the competences of investigators. When we were preparing for the pilot in Boryspil, we met with Mr. CHIBISOV, and we were discussing this issue for many times. And we were receiving some criticism and negative comments that you will undermine, you will destroy our operative work. But we analyzed the statistics, and what we saw is over the last 4 years before this pilot project in Boryspil, they initiated operative searching activities, or operative searching cases. There were only 2 proceedings that were used as a source of evidence in court, and there were no informant handling work, which makes our academicians concerned. And I would like to stress that there's a possibility to carry out covert searching investigative activities, but before that investigators were not using this opportunity. This is the current criminal procedural code that stipulates this. There are no any illegal or illegitimate methods in our concept. It's fully legal. More than that, we call a detective that people understand it's something absolutely different, revised, reconsidered approach. And this is not a fully feasible model. It's a pilot project, pilot model, and it needs to be tried, needs to be tested. First, at the level of certain units or districts, areas, and if we realize that there are changes or amendments needed, there are certain safeguards needed, there are certain definitions need to be introduced. So far we don't change these, we're just changing the concept, and once it's tested, we will be able to speak about some legislative amendments. So far we are acting in line with the applicable law. Please, the last comment, and we'll close this session. I represent the Prosecution Academy. I was also involved to a certain extent into this process. Our code stipulates that the number of operatives will be reducing and the number of investigators will be growing. What was made 5 years ago, we started to do that this year. It used to be 1 to 5, now it's even less than 1 to 3. Still there's a much bigger number of operatives, and it's a question about responsibility, because operatives are not responsible, not accountable for everything. This is why we started to apply the law. And what will be the difference between detectives and investigators? What are the competences they will have? If they are allowed to do operative searching activity, they will stop doing investigation. So we don't need amendments, but we just need to fulfill the requirements of the Criminal Procedural Code. Thank you for your support. I apologize, we cannot continue the discussion, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. We exceeded our time limit. I would like to just pass the floor for summing up, for some summary conclusions.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Let me. Thank you very much. Let me just summarize what was discussed today. I think we all agree that merging operatives and investigators is necessary. As I was very happy that I could hear justification from my local colleagues that everything is completely in the frame of current law. Of course, if for us currently, detective, let's call it a working name only of this position, okay? I personally prefer to use universal investigator. So currently, it's stage when we are in Ukraine introducing universal investigator, okay? If we would like to introduce detective position, of course, we would have to go for law changes, which would be the second stage, as I said during my presentation. It's so-called long-term task, okay? Accept these changes, and I named all laws which are necessary to amend because of these changes. But I'm really very happy that a lot of people here in this room understands this project. And let me thank in the end of this panel discussion to Head of National Police, Mr. Knyazhev, for his deep understanding of necessity to reform National Police of Ukraine and for very strong support since things started really moving after he was appointed in his position. Also to his deputy, Mr. VAKULENKO, Oleksandr VAKULENKO, who we started together to consider this project actually, and if wouldn't be him, he would never start this project. So thanks a lot for your support, huge support. Also, I would like to thank to Dmytro, CHIBISOV, Chief Prosecutor of Kyiv region. Again, I must mention a huge understanding of the topic and very proactive approach and strong support. And I would like to also thank to Mr. KAREIEV for mentioning NABU experience with detective position, which shows that if there is a will, there is a way to do it. So thanks a lot, even to Joachim VENZ for giving us his opinion from German point of view. And Denis MONASTYRSKII, great idea to involve in our discussion. Operative from Borispol, former operative from Borispol, currently already universal investigator. And also thanks a lot for your support, Denis. So let me hand over floor to moderator. Thanks a lot and have a nice day.
Дякую.
So closing this discussion, I would like to thank all the speakers and participants for very fruitful discussion, for opening of this very important topic. And at the end, I would like to highlight that unfortunately I have not heard about those safeguards, and Mr. VLASIUK mentioned, in fact, to a certain extent, I mean those safeguards ensuring human rights. I just wanted to say one thing at the end, that we cannot influence or carry out any kind of public control over efficiency of criminal investigations and operative searching activities or covert searching activities. Because the statistics of this is a state secret from 2005, and it's quite normal when there are permits for wiretapping of telephone conversations, but what was the result of that we don't know. What was the consequence of that, and that's a matter of privacy, and this is why we need to think about some draft laws, but that can be only made on the basis of certain outcomes and deliverables of pilot projects, given we have some positive features, so that as part of this model we could also focus and incorporate such elements as human rights, and that those safeguards for human rights could be implemented. Again, I would like to thank all of you, and I would like to invite all of you to our lunch break.